I must admit that I have borrowed some footage from Jasper's Chronicles in order to tell the tale of the cat or discuss the symbol of the cat. And I'm raising this not only because cats are wonderful anyway, but because we are entering Mabon, the time of year when we celebrate autumn and the approach of the unconscious and all things associated. Along with the owl, the bat, and the wolf, the animal most commonly associated with witches was the cat. Like everything else associated with witchcraft, this idea dated back to ancient goddess worship. The Teutonic mother Freya rode in a chariot drawn by cats. Artemis Diana often appeared in cat form and was identified with the Egyptian cat goddess Bast. The willow sacred to Hecate became a pussy willow that bore, quote, catkins in the spring. Cat worship began in Egypt, where the first domesticated cats descended from a wild ancestor, Felis libica. Plutarch said the cat was carved on Isis' holy sistrum and represented the moon. Its activity in the night and the peculiar circumstances which attended its fecundity, making it a proper emblem of that body. For it is reported of this creature that it first brings forth one, then two, afterwards three, and goes on adding one to each former birth till it comes to 7, so that she brings forth 28 in all, corresponding as it were to the several degrees of light which appear during the moon's revolutions. The Egyptian word for cat was mao, both an imitation of the cat's cry and a mother syllable. Cats were so sacred in Egypt that any man who killed one was condemned to death. Diodorus, a 1st century BC Greek historian, told of a foolish Roman who killed a cat in Egypt and was slain in his own house by an infuriated mob. According to Barbara Walker's Women's Encyclopedia of Myths and Secrets, Shay's etymological dictionary derived witch from medieval English Wicca, formerly Anglo-Saxon Wicca, masculine, or Wicca, feminine, a corruption of Vitka, short form of Vitega, a seer or diviner. Early medieval England had female clan leaders who exercised matriarchal rights in law-giving and law enforcement. The Magna Carta of Chester called them iudice de witch, or vitch, judges who were witches. Female elders once had political power among the clans, but patriarchal religion and law gradually took it away from them and called them witches in order to dispose of them. Any unusual ability in a woman instantly trained a charge of witchcraft. Witches were convenient scapegoats for doctors who failed to cure their patients, for it was the, quote, received belief that witch-caused illnesses were incurable, which has provided a focus for sexist hatred in a male-dominated society. According to historian Stanton, women and their duties became objects of hatred to the Christian missionaries and of alternate scorn and fear to pious ascetics and monks. The priestess mother became something impure, associated with the devil, and her lure an infernal incantation, her very cooking a brewing of poison, nay, her very existence a source of sin to man. Thus woman as mother and priestess became woman as witch. Here is the reason why in all the biblical researches and higher criticism, the scholars never touch the position of women. I think that's a fair criticism, and I am not trying to crap on anybody's religion. I think all patriarchal religions are problematic, and for that reason I tend to reject them in their dogma, but I'm one of those don't throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thinkers. I think that my Catholic upbringing gave me a lot of rich protection from a cruel world and motivated a type of leaning into being a little better than I might have gotten simply from my family and community. That does not mean that I believe that religion is the source of all morality. I think that humans are very capable of moral reasoning outside of a religious context. And of course, Jasper agrees with me on that, and he will, I'm sure, have more to say on the subject. But I just wanted to touch on the topics of interest that we find going into fall, Mabon Equinox, which is coming up in a few days, when the day and the night are equal, and the spooky season of Halloween, that is one of my absolute favorite holidays. So, what do we often see? Cats, especially black cats, witches, acorns and acorn trees. And that brings me to my next subject of interest, which is druids and the oak tree. Druids. Europe's sacred oak cultists were known by many names. Greek myth said the dryads were oak nymphs, each an oracular priestess with her own personal tree spirit, like the biblical Deborah, who lived under a tree that bore her own name. Judges 4:5. Dryads were called priestesses of Artemis, whose souls dwelt in their trees. They could also assume the shapes of serpents and were then called hamadryads or amadryads. In the druidic groves throughout northern Europe, Strabo said they practiced rites, quote, similar to the orgies of Samothrace. Dryadism and Druidism were two phases of the same religion, evidently restricted to a female priesthood in the earlier matriarchal stage, later open to male priests as well. Gaulish and British priests of the oak groves formed a class of bardic wizards, keeping a sacred tradition by memorizing orally transmitted material, the nucleus of medieval sagas, epics, and ballads. Druids were attacked by the Christian Church for their paganism, but especially for their propensity to include sacred women in their ranks. Scott said even in his day there were feminine spirits associated with shapeshifters, and they could appear as either birds or women. They know our thoughts and can prophesy of things to come. Despite nominal conversion to Christianity, the Irish clung to Druidism for many centuries. Their revered pagan king, Diarmuid, was called half a Druid and half a Christian. To some extent, the mystical reverence for oak trees persists to this day. Many British and American towns have their venerable charter oak or some superannuated tree where seasonal ceremonies take place. Acorns and oak leaves are still considered appropriate for wreaths and harvest decorations, even if they no longer crown the goddess's sacred kings. Along with the vulture and raven, the crow, the carrion-eating bird, was Northern Europe's common symbol of the death goddess. Valkyries, sometimes described as man-eating women, often took totemic form as ravens or crows. Such manifestations of the goddess as a crow might be linked with Coronis, crow, a death aspect of the pre-Hellenic Earth Mother Re. Classical mythographers tended to ignore Coronis, remembering her only as the virgin mother of the healing god Asclepius, but she seems to have been another of the virgin-crone combinations. Re Cronia as Mother Time, who brings death to all
death
things.
is something we should not fear, as it is in returning to the soil, dark, rich, pheasant, as a dying seed, that we are able to then be reborn, green and growing in springtime, blossoming in full, rich colors in autumn, to be blissfully harvested.